Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Since it's part of my practice of devotional service to read out loud a certain amount of time every day, and by going online, then someone else may hear something. But I was sitting here today and I was kind of like, I don't know what I'm gonna say. I don't have anything to say. I'm not big and important, and who knows if anybody will even look at this, and why am I doing this anyway, and going through all that kind of stuff. And then one of the books here about Krishna, and I looked at the picture, and Krishna was smiling. And Krishna was smiling. Because that's what it's about, really, is to please Krishna. Whether you have a whole bunch of people all following you all around, you're listening to your every word, or even if nobody's even listening, Krishna's listening. I think Prabhupada said, you can preach to the four walls. The main thing is that Krishna's pleased, Krishna's smiling. So I looked at the book, the picture of Krishna, and he was smiling. And then I looked at the other book that's on the desk here, and he was smiling again. He was smiling. So I said, all right, Hare Krishna. I just want to see Krishna smiling. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, and Prabhupada is honoring his disappearance day in about a week. When is it honored? I think November 7th, is honoring the day Prabhupada disappeared. And so I'm reading here from his biography. And in 6 or 7 or 8 days, whatever, the whole world will honor the disappearance of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who was empowered by Krishna to spread the holy name to every town and village on the planet. And if you don't think Krishna was smiling on that one. So this is about that great soul, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. It's an amazing person. Hare Krishna. Miraculous. It's funny, he said, anyone can do what I did. I'm just one man. Everyone should do. I'm nothing special, nothing, I'm coming from some other planet. He said like that. He said, I'm just one man. I surrender to my spiritual master and I'm doing service. Everyone can do like this. Everyone has to do like this. Jai Shri Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. So here, this is the little section before Prabhupada left India. He was trying to establish a devotional institution. His spiritual master's institution had become factioned and was not able to work together. Each one was trying to work separately, and they were fighting and arguing. After Bhaktivedanta left, his institution became splintered. So Prabhupada was trying to, saw the need and was trying to develop something that would work together. And he'd been given some buildings in Jhansi, and he was preaching, and he was getting a really good taste for it. But then the wealthy merchant who gave the buildings and the facilities to A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami began to change his tune a little bit. First, because Prabhupada didn't have a written deed, he only had a spoken consent. And for something like this, it has to be in writing. So when he approached the wealthy merchant to get something in writing, the merchant said, well, I can do this, but I need 500 rupees to register the deed. And Prabhupada had been spending money he didn't even have to try and have a grand opening, and he was doing all kinds of traveling and preaching. And his followers, at that point, none of them were working full time. Some of them were students being supported by their parents. They didn't have funds, and he'd already tapped into so many others for the grand opening. So he found himself in an awkward position, and he thought, well, let me go back. And then it got even worse. The merchant changed again and said, actually, we need for you to buy the property. I need 5,000 rupees, and then it's yours. Buy it. I'll sell it. I'm going to sell it, and I'll give you the best price. So now it's getting very awkward. This Prabhupada's been preaching, he's got a big sign out, League of Devotees, and the property's in jeopardy. The merchant wants to sell. He evidently has no particular affinity for Prabhupada's preaching. And so Prabhupada thought to go back to what was left of his business in Calcutta and try to crank it up, come up with some money. So there he is, back again into the family. It's the same old thing it was, and that was it. His wife took his Bhagavatam and traded it for tea biscuits, and that was it. Because he was getting no support, either for business or for his preaching. They just were too dull, evidently, to show any attraction or to want to even help at all. So he left. He left home with absolutely nothing. He borrowed a few rupees so he could take the tram or whatever kind of transportation they had in the 50s in India. And he went to one of the Chaitanya mats. And he joined the temple. He had nothing, everything been taken away, there he was. He joined the temple. And he was serving like that and preaching and living in the ashram. Like a Vanaprast brahmachari type in the ashram. But then he was thinking of Jhansi, and he thought, I have to try again to do something in Jhansi. So he's going to leave the shelter of the mat in Calcutta, and he was chanting the holy name, detached from family. He's not going back. Chanting japa almost continuously, and would speak also on Bhagavad Gita in the temple. He felt, after a while, after recuperating, he felt ready to go back to the League of Devotees and try to develop the preaching there. But before returning, he obtained a large deity of Lord Chaitanya. I wonder where that deity is. That he planned to install at Bharati Bhavan, the name of the temple in League of Devotee Temple. Ironically, he'd gone to Calcutta to do business and raise money, but now he had no money and no business and no family responsibilities. He had been married 36 years. Now, at age 58, he had fully taken to Vanaprast. Now he could dedicate his life fully to preaching Krishna consciousness. And it bothered him that some of his children weren't married and the business needed help. But he thought, if I die now, who will help them? Krishna will help them. So by renouncing like he did, it was like being dead. He was dead to his family responsibilities, family duty. So Krishna will have to help them. If I were to actually die right now, Krishna would have to help them. So let me die like that, and then Krishna will take care of them, and I'd be free to preach. Okay. Abai did not adopt the saffron dress of a Brahmaprast, but continued wearing a white dhoti in kirtan. The people of Jhansi had always known him as a preacher with no family ever since he had first arrived a year and a half before. Now he was returning to them with a deity of Lord Chaitanya and determination to establish Lord Chaitanya's temple in Jhansi. Abai met with a warm welcome from Acharya Prabhupada and others, but he also met with competition for possession of the Radha Memorial. That was the properties. It was called a Radha Memorial. It began with a Sanskrit conference, the Bandlikan Sanskrit Sammelan, which brought to Jhansi the governor of the province, K.M. Munshi, and his wife, Lilamrta. An active social organizer, Lilamrta Munshi had opened several branches of the Mahila Samit Sangh, a society that aimed at socially uplifting women by teaching them secretarial skills and English. Two educated Jhansi ladies, Chandramukhi and Suryamukhi, wanted a women's social program for Jhansi, and they took the opportunity to approach Lilamrta Munshi during her visit. She inspired them, and they began to talk about where in Jhansi they could open one of her social centers. Perhaps, suggested one of the ladies, the Bharati Bhavan could be used. Although Suryamukhi Sharma had been one of the sympathizers who had first approached Mr. Bayal on behalf of Abai Charanday and had asked that he be given the Bharati Bhavan for his League of Devotees, she felt that the ladies' cause was more important. She knew that Abai's ownership of the buildings was not settled. The women agreed that the buildings would be an excellent facility for Mahila Samhita Sangha branch and that their cause was more urgent than Abai Charan's. Suryamukhi, assured of support by the governor's wife, called on A.C. Bhaktivedanta. She explained that his League of Worldwide Vaishnavas would never take shape. He was a nice person and she liked him, but she didn't think he could realize his extraordinary expectations. She suggested he vacate the Bhavati Bhavan so that the governor's wife could organize a women's social center. You can go here and there for the sake of building a temple, she told him. You are free to travel anywhere, but these poor women in Jhansi have nothing, so they must be given these buildings for their use. She found him adamantly opposed. No, Abai said. Find another building. Abai argued that his work was not just for a section of people, but for all living beings. Suryamukhi felt frustrated. Abai was surprised that a member of the League of Devotees was now working against him, and the maneuver was being backed by the governor's wife. Mrs. Munshi could work at a much more influential level without having to confront Abai directly and without his even knowing what she was doing. After she talked with Mr. Bayal, word got around that Mr. Bayal had been pressured to persuade Abai Charan to relinquish his claim on the Bharati Bhavan. So now it wasn't a matter of 500 rupees or a matter of 5,000 rupees. It was a matter of, please leave. No amount of money at this point because of the pressure from the governor's wife. Mr. Bayal owned a cinema house in Jhansi, and there was a talk that he could have a lot of difficulty with his operator's license unless Abai Charan vacate the Radha Memorial. Okay, so this is going on. If Prabhupada doesn't leave, then Mr. Bayal, he'll lose his license to run the cinema. So he has to give these buildings or sell them, or whatever he's going to do, to the ladies so they can be taught how to read and write and type. Economic development. In December 1954, Mrs. Munshi wrote Abai in reference to his failure to raise the 5,000 rupees. Dear Bhaktivedanta ji, she wrote, you wanted to organize there, but you could not. But I have got this institution, Mahila Samiti. Why not give it to me? Abai was of a mind to resist. He had lawyer friends who advised him that even though he was opposed by the governor's family, he had a good case, and it would stand up well in court. India's tradition of respect for religious buildings was on his side. Abai replied to Mrs. Munshi, introducing himself as the founder of the League of Devotees. He explained the goal of the League, enclosed a copy of his perspective, and presented many statements by prominent people, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Shri Sitaram, Raj Mahendra Pratap, and even her husband, Sri K.M. Munshi, praising the wonderful work of the League of Devotees. He also mentioned that the president of the League had received a 100 rupee donation from Mathura from His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Munshi himself. Abai said that although work had been going slowly but peacefully in Jhansi, his mind had now been bothered by Mrs. Munshi's negotiations. He requested her not to pressure anyone about his occupying Bharati Bhavan, though he admitted, if you or any one of your agents do try, the pressure will be more weightful. I am a non-entity in that comparison. So he wants her to understand what his mission is and to soften her heart and know that she does have power to try to get him out, but to ask her to please surrender, to try to understand the urgency of what he's trying to do, and please surrender. Abai hoped that by his presenting the details of his league, she would understand that his was a better cause than the Matila Samiti. He quoted the first three verses, 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, wherein Lord Krishna describes how the ancient science of Bhakti Yoga is received through parampara, the order of succession from one teacher to the next, and how kings are responsible for seeing that Krishna consciousness spreads for everyone's benefit. He also argued that since, according to Bhagavad Gita, only a few amongst thousands and thousands of men endeavor for self-realization, and since the League of Devotees engaged its members in self-realization, he was providing an important and rare service. Lance is here, and he says, Prabhupada, went through so very much, but Krishna had it all in control perfectly. Yes, and Prabhupada was perfectly surrendered to Krishna. Krishna So it's not that there aren't obstacles or difficulties. Hare Krishna. If we make some effort, I've heard this said before too, if we make some effort toward Krishna, even if it's like in the wrong direction or it isn't quite right, because we're trying, then Krishna, he points us in the right direction. And he corrects what it is. If we make some effort, we have some desire, we make some effort. So Prabhupada is trying. He's making effort. Prabhupada offered to meet with Mrs. Munshi along with some 15 sannyasis from the area and suggested that she work cooperatively with them and understand the importance of the League. The League of Devotees was benefiting all classes. As Krishna had said in Bhagavad Gita, even one of a low birth can attain the shelter of the Supreme Lord. But the Mahila Samiti, I pointed out, was based on bodily conceptions, caste, creed, color, and sex. Therefore, it could not be as an important a cause. I closed by requesting Mrs. Munshi not to try to occupy the Radha Memorial, which was already being used for a noble and well-appreciated cause. He signed, A.C. Bhaktivedanta, Founder and Secretary, League of Devotees. Aware that he was involved in an intrigue, Abai organized his thoughts and set down on paper a short history, outlining important events surrounding his possession of the Bharati Bhavan. So this is the list. Prabhupada put a timeline here because he's involved in this intrigue and he wanted to put a timeline. So number 1, I came to Jhansi sometime in October 1952. I delivered some lectures at Gita Mandir on Gandhi Jayanti Day, 1952. Made acquaintance with Prabhupada Shastri. Now that's his first disciple. Acharya Prabhupada now. My idea of League of Devotees implemented. He took me to Ravi Shankar for Bharati Bhavan. Shri Ravi Shankar agreed to hand over Bharati Bhavan to League of Devotees, and he agreed to become a member of it in the presence of Prabhupada, Mitraji, and myself. So this looks like if Prabhupada were to have to take up a legal battle, he would need to have a series of events clearly marked. So it looks like preparing for a possible legal entanglement. Number 7, I write letters from Allahabad to confirm. He confirmed my letters on 10/12/52. Prabhupada intimated the desire of Ravi Shankar on 1/1/53. I got the document needed for League of Devotees and came to Jhansi for signature of the members. Ravi Shankar signed and agreed to become an executive member. The document was submitted for registration on 4/2/53 at Lucknow and returned on 10/10/53. The League of Devotees ceremonies, they started they do their dates differently. Yeah, they put the day before they put the month before the, what do they do? They put the day before the month. So, anyway, the League of Devotees ceremonies, they started, as we would say, 5/16/53, and work began. So I'm occupying the building since then and continuing my work. Abai went on to enumerate more than 30 points, including news publicity and congratulations he had received. He listed the story of how he, quote, came here sacrificing my business and family. I received a telegram from Allahabad instructing the news of burglary by the breaking of our lock. I could not attend the business for work here, and it was closed subsequently at a loss of 7,000 rupees, end quote. Abai thought of turning to some of his sannyasi godbrothers for help. if he or they could purchase the buildings, his competitors would be silenced. He thought it worthwhile to interest his godbrothers in purchasing the buildings as an adjunct to their own missions. Here's another stone wall. Vrindavan was not far away, a 4-hour train ride to Mathura and then a short Tunga ride. He had gone there on pilgrimage in October of 1953 and had even looked at an available room in a temple near Keshigat with the idea of staying there someday. He had also traveled there several other times since he had begun residing in Jhansi. At this time, he went to the Imlatal temple to see his godbrother Bhaktivedanta Goswami and asked if he would like to take over proprietorship of Bharati Bhavan so that it might be used for preaching Krishna consciousness according to the teachings of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But Bhaktivedanta Goswami was not interested. After approaching another godbrother, Damodar Maharaj, who was not interested in Jhansi, Abai took the short Tunga ride back to Mathura to see another godbrother, Keshava Maharaj. Keshava Maharaj was in Mathura with a group of his disciples to establish a center, but he had not yet located a suitable place. So when Abai told him about the buildings in Jhansi, he was interested. Abai and Keshava Maharaj composed a letter to Mr. Bayal presenting their requests and the aims of their movement, and then traveled to Jhansi in a group. Abai, Keshava Maharaj, and his disciples. Keshava Maharaj and his party stayed for several days in Jhansi, holding kirtans and lectures. They had an appointment with Reva Shankar Bayal, but Mr. Bayal broke it, so they had to wait to see him on another day. Meanwhile, Keshava Maharaj had time to form an opinion of Jhansi and discuss with Abai the likelihood of making this his headquarters. He noted that the people were receptive, but the location was too remote. Even before meeting with Mr. Bayal, Keshava Maharaj felt reluctant to stake his whole mission in Jhansi. Abai agreed, aware that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had said a preacher should go into big cities and not practice his bhajan in seclusion. And he admitted that after 2 years in Jhansi, he had made no full-time followers. Even the one disciple was not a full-time, serving full-time. He was a student and a teacher, and I think he was a principal of a small college there. And he would help Prabhupada, but he wasn't full-time. When they met with Mr. Bayal failed to present clear terms for purchasing the property. He said they were eligible to buy it, but he made their use of the buildings conditional. He wanted to have a say in the nature of the programs they would hold. Abai knew that this was just a further sign of shady dealings. And he suspected Mr. Bayal was under mounting pressure to give the buildings over to the Mahila Samhita. Keshava Maharaj, having lost all interest, decided to go back to Mathura. He invited Abai to join him. But Abai remained. Mr. Bayal wanted him out, and he even returned Abai's deposit of 210 rupees, claiming that Abai now had no justification for residing at Bharata Bhavan. Abai noted down the latest events in his short history. 29. He has also given me the check for 210 rupees in lieu of my deposit money with him, but he has no money in the bank. The bank has returned it with remark. He returned the check, but Mr. Bayal has no money in the bank. Number 30. The money which was given to him was misappropriated by him for his own purpose, and now he's given a false check. with an arrangement with the bank. So not only he gave the check back, but he made sure it was out of an account that had no money, so he stole Prabhupada's 210 rupees. 31. It is plain, cheating to me from beginning to the end. I must be compensated for all the money before I can leave the buildings. Whew. Goes from bad to worse, doesn't it? But he saw it as the inscrutable will of Krishna. Events and opinions were turning against him conducting a mission in Jhansi. It no longer seemed auspicious. So Srila Prabhupada said, I wanted to start from there. It was a nice big house. It was not given to me rightly, but I was using. So somehow or other, she got imagination that this house is very nice. She's the governor's wife. Through collector and through government officials, she made pressure. So of course, there were many lawyer friends. They advised me, do not give up. But I thought, who's going to litigate? I thought, I have left my home and now I should take up litigation? No, I don't want to do this. I don't want this house. Abai remembered how the Gaudiya Math preachers had expended their energy for years in the courts. Nasty, messy stuff. Having terminated his long entanglement with family and business, he had no taste for a legal fight. He could have fought, but he remembered what Keshava Maharaj said about Jhansi being out of the way. Of course, the whole thing had just sprung up here. Otherwise, Abai would never have chosen to establish his worldwide league in such an obscure place. The educated young men and women wished him well, just as they had good wishes for the Ladies' League, the Theosophy Society, the Arya Samaj, and many other causes. But their good intentions were certainly short of pure surrender and devotion. Even his one disciple could offer him only part-time help. But these considerations had not been sufficient to force him out. The real thing was that he was being driven out. Srila Prabhupada said, if I did not leave, nobody could drive me, that was a fact. But I thought, who is going to litigate these things? It's the governor's wife, she's pressing through the collector. The manager who is in charge, he had some cinema house. So they had to renew the license, and the collector pressed him that unless you arrange this house for the governor's wife, we're not going to renew your license. I thought, unnecessarily, this man will be in trouble. I will have to pay many rupees, and she is the governor's wife. He decided to leave. He told his friends to carry on the League of Devotees in his absence. They were very sad to see him go, and yet even some of his friends openly praised the work of the Ladies' Society and were glad to see it come. They had not been able to help him financially, although they knew that he had been unable to purchase the buildings on his own. His close followers were more affected, but he assured them that their relationship would continue. He would write letters to them, Acharya Prabhakar, Radhilal Muli, Mr. Mitra, Dr. Shastri, and he gave them instructions on what they should do, especially Acharya Prabhakar. Abai told him he would be calling for him and expected him to come as secretary of the League of Devotees, even if they didn't make Jhansi their main residence. Yet it was obvious that this chapter of making ambitious plans for a world movement, going from house to house and village to village, performing Sankirtan, lecturing on the Gita, distributing prasadam, was ended. And it was not likely that he would return, or that the residents of Jhansi could expect to see him again. When Abai left, the Bharati Bhavan, with its 6-foot-high lettering, League of Devotees, painted across the outside wall, he felt sad. It had been a natural, spontaneous success for him. The young, educated people of Jhansi had looked up to him from the start, and had it not been for the intrigue, he would never have left. but he felt he had no real choice. He had come as a family man on business and was leaving as a homely vanaprastha, a homeless vanaprastha, forced to take shelter of Krishna. Wow, Jhansi really... He had come as a family man on business and was leaving as a homeless vanaprastha, forced to take shelter of Krishna. His plans were uncertain, but his desire was strong, and his health was good. So he moved on to Mathura, carrying with him the deity of Lord Chaitanya. Where is that deity now, I wonder? I have to find out where that deity is. That's the first deity. Well, Prabhupada's little Radha Krishna deities are the first deities, and this is the second deity. Hare Krishna. And then there's the little Jagannath deities. Wow, they all came to Prabhupada at different times. The little Radha Krishna deities, the little Jagannath deities, and now Lord Chaitanya. It was a big deity. Well, I don't know, was he riding on the train with Lord Chaitanya? Woo, Krishna. Oh no. Oh, Krishna. It's chapter 8, and it's called New Delhi. Crying alone in the wilderness. So there's a little excerpt here before the chapter begins. It's from a letter to India's president, Mr. Rajendra Prasad. Prabhupada writes, I have got the clue of going back to Godhead just after leaving my present material body. And in order to take along with me all my contemporary men and women of the world, I have started my paper back to Godhead as one of the means to the way. Please don't think of me as something wonderful or a madman when I say that I shall go back to Godhead after leaving my present material body. It is quite possible for everyone and all of us. Crying alone in the wilderness in New Delhi. God, Hare Krishna. When Abai arrived in Mathura, he sought out Keshava Maharaj, who was now establishing his mat, and presented him with the deity of Lord Chaitanya. Okay, so that's where that deity is in Keshava's. I think Keshava also is the one who gave Prabhupada sannyas initiation. So he gave that big deity to Keshava Maharaj in return. At Keshava Maharaj's request, Abai agreed to stay there and edit the Gaudiya Patrika. Abai was given a room, and for the first time, aside from brief visits, he lived in a mat with his godbrothers. As a senior, experienced devotee, Abai held classes and instructed the brahmacharis who were young, uneducated, and even illiterate in the disciplines of devotional service and the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. He had only recently begun his duties when Bhakti Saranga Goswami, another sannyasi godbrother, asked Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada to assist him in New Delhi at his ashram, Gaudiya San. Both Keshava Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Goswami recognized Abai as an accomplished writer and editor and wanted to work with him. They were friends from early on, these godbrothers. They were friends from early on. It was accepted among Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples that A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhu was an expert preacher and writer in English, Hindi, or Bengali. Now, Keshava Maharaj wanted Abai to stay and work on the Gaudiya Patrika, while Bhakti Saranga Maharaj, who had to go to Bengal, was requesting him to come to Delhi to produce the Harmonist. known in Hindi as Sajjanatoshini. Abai was agreeable to Bhaktisaranga Goswami's proposition, and Keshava Maharaj consented on the condition that Abai also continued to edit the Gaudiya Patrika, at least by mail. Yeah, this thing about being in a busy city for preaching, so New Delhi would be, that would be the place to be. Keshava was in Mathura, the holy Dham, but New Delhi was, so it's understandable, at least from that previously little incident Prabhupada had with Keshava about being too remote. As an editor, Abai was in his element, and he was happy to preach in cooperation with his godbrothers. Although Abai didn't consider himself an accomplished scholar or author, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had been pleased by his writings and had encouraged him to continue. Now these senior sannyasis of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati were turning to him for help. They were practically competing to see who would get the benefit of his services. Perhaps Abai thought, this should be his life's work, simply serving humbly under the direction of godbrothers. His ejection from Jhansi had been a kind of setback. At least it had left him temporarily unsure of how Krishna wanted to use him. But now his godbrothers seemed to be answering the question. Living and working in an ashram with brahmacharis and sannyasis was a way of life Abai had once considered. He had once considered too austere. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had remarked, better he live outside your company. But now he would either have to struggle alone with nothing or stay within the shelter of a friendly portion of the Gaudiya Math. Perhaps he could carry out his desires to preach Krishna consciousness within the ashrams of his godbrothers. Since he would soon be the editor of Sajjanatoshini, he began thinking of how to expand it. It was a scholarly Vaishnava journal, but cheaply produced, with a very limited circulation. He envisioned it surpassing India's slick illustrated weekly. It should be more popular than Time or Life magazines in America. Why not? Krishna was no poor man. Abai thought of how he could start an ambitious subscription program by approaching the many prominent and wealthy men of New Delhi. Then, by Krishna's grace, he would be able to print color photos and use high-quality paper for Sajjanatoshini. He would give it his best effort, depending on Krishna, and while soliciting subscribers, he could take his book manuscripts and try to get them published. Dr. Alagappa in South India had wanted to publish his Gita-Upanishad. No doubt there were many men like him, or perhaps Bhaktisaranga Goswami would be willing to publish Abai's work with funds from the Gaudiya Sangha. Abai soon received a letter from Bhaktisaranga Goswami's assistant, carefully instructing him how to travel to Delhi at the least expense. He was to travel by train, third class to Delhi, and from there take a tanga. That's a horse-drawn carriage. Since tangas at the station gate charged too much, Abai should first walk about 100 meters toward the right-hand side of the station where he would find a cheaper one. Were he to ride alone, he should pay no more than 1 rupee and 12 annas, but he should try to share the tanga with another passenger. That would be cheaper. Keeping the crematorium to your left-hand side, the assistant instructed him, if you look toward the right, you'll be able to see our red flag and the signboard written in Hindi and English. When you reach here, you will pay for the tanga. We will pay for the tanga. At the Gaudiya Sangha, Abai found a disconcerting state of affairs. In the absence of their guru, Bhaktisaranga Goswami, the brahmacharis were quarreling, and shirking their duties. And as a result, the preaching and donation gathering were being neglected. When the teacher leaves the room, cleanliness, deity worship, cooking, and even peace among the devotees were below standard. And like most of the mats of his godbrothers, the Gaudiya Sangha was poor. Abai had come thinking he would be editing a magazine, but he found himself contending with a group of quarreling neophyte devotees. He learned that the brahmachari responsible for giving public lectures had not done any preaching. The devotees who had previously been holding kirtans in people's homes were now negligent, and the errand boy refused to run because he lost his bicycle. Then a brahmachari handed Abai a letter from Bhaktisaranga Goswami requesting him to take up the general management of the mat. So this is a quote from this letter from Bhaktisaranga. Inspire everyone to be engaged in service, otherwise I do not know how we were going to print the English monthly magazine. Since we don't have much money in the fund and the brahmacharis are quite careless, Akinchana Maharaj wrote that he is unable to take the responsibility of the management. It will be very nice if you could keep your eyes on these affairs. And Abai found other obstacles in trying to produce Sajjana Toshini. No typewriter, bad relations with the printer. It looks like Krishna is preparing Prabhupada to leave India altogether. Whatever difficulties he faced in the West is, this door is closing. In a few days, Abai received another letter from Bhaktisaranga Goswami telling him what articles to print, cautioning him not to change essential elements in the magazine and reminding him of his special duty. So this is a little excerpt from the letter. I have asked Akinchan Maharaj to hand over the keys of my room to you, so that you may use my room only for your office work. As you are there, you should try to maintain peace in the ashram for giving necessary instructions to one and all. Abai saw that he could do no editorial work until the laxity and petty quarreling in the ashram stopped. But when he tried to help, as Bhaktisaranga Goswami had directed, some of the devotees rebelled and even wrote to their spiritual master complaining. Yeah, like, who's he? It was against many obstacles that Abai met the publisher's deadline for the August 1955 issue of Sajjana Toshini. Yet, owing to the printer's delay, the magazine did not come out until September. When at last the first copies were delivered, Abai sent several to Bhaktisaranga Goswami in Calcutta asking for his response. Abai never heard from his godbrother directly, but received further instructions from Bhaktisaranga Goswami's secretary, Ramananda, who pointed out various mistakes in the issue, without mentioning whether Bhaktisaranga had been pleased with it. The errors were mostly technical matters of style. Abai had done the contents page in a different way and had not printed Bhaktisaranga Goswami's name exactly as he had wanted it on all his articles. Regarding Abai's request for a typewriter, Ramananda wrote that if the matters are distinctly written, there is no necessity of them being given to the printer in typewritten. Abai wrote to Bhaktisaranga Goswami requesting him to return to Delhi and establish a peaceful atmosphere in the mat. Regarding Sajjana Toshini, Bhaktisaranga Goswami had suggested that the paper for the cover be improved and that the whole magazine be done on nicer paper by an up-to-date press, and Abai agreed. But improvements depended on money. So this is a letter, evidently, from Bhaktisaranga. No, this is a letter from Prabhupada to Bhakti Swami. The suggestion that the paper may be printed from Calcutta is all right, but my suggestion is that either in Calcutta or in Delhi, we must have our own press with good equipment so we may be able to broadcast the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in all the important languages, especially Hindi and English. Hindi is meant for all India propaganda, while English is meant for worldwide propaganda. Abai further reported that since it was almost impossible to expect a printer to work speedily from handwritten manuscripts, he had already rented a typewriter. He also mentioned his ideas for increasing the number of subscribers. Abai's son Brindaban came to live with him for a few months at the Gaudiya Sangha. There was no question of Abai's returning to his family, and Vrindavan simply associated with his father, following the routines of the Math and helping Abai in his duties. One day, a prominent advocate, the president of the Hindu Mahasabha, paid an unexpected visit to Gaudiya Sangha. The Math was mostly deserted and there was no prasadam on hand, so Abai and Vrindavan received the prominent guest cooking for him, offering him prasadam, and acquainting him with the activities of the Sangha. Jai! Prabhupada's son came like that, did some service. Finally. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Okay, so it's going to go on. It's a long chapter, and this is the adventures in New Delhi with Bhakti Saranga and Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada. My goodness. One thing after another. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. All glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. If you hadn't struggled like that, where would we be? Where would the world be? Hare Krishna. Wow. Hare Krishna. Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda. Krishna. Prabhupada's head wasn't turned by his later success. He was always struggling to push forward more and more. And the obstacles were there, as they are now. Hare Krishna.